If someone had told Sarah Campbell that her life would change completely after crying in the company bathroom, she would have laughed. But there she was, at 28, dabbing her tears with cheap toilet paper, trying to understand how her presentation had been utterly destroyed by her own boss. The humiliation was still burning in her chest when she heard the sound of men's shoes approaching. Her heart hammered. The restroom was unisex, but it should have been empty at this hour. She shrank back into the stall, praying that whoever it was would just do their business and leave. But then a deep, familiar voice asked, "Is everything all right in there?" It was Richard Sterling, the CEO. The most powerful man in the company was on the other side of the door, and she was in here with swollen eyes and a shattered heart. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. Of course, it had to be him. The man who ran Sterling Innovations with an iron fist, known for his cold, relentless efficiency, the one everyone feared and respected in equal measure. And now he was witnessing her complete emotional breakdown. "I'm fine, thank you," she lied, her voice still trembling. She tried to pull herself together, wiping her face and taking a deep breath, but she knew she couldn't hide the state she was in. "It doesn't sound like it," he replied, and there was something different in his voice, softer than she had ever heard. "Can I help?" Sarah almost laughed at the irony. The CEO offering to help the administrative assistant who had just been publicly humiliated by her own manager. Veronica Vance had practically torn her apart in front of the entire team, criticizing every aspect of her work and suggesting that maybe Sarah wasn't cut out for this environment. "That's kind of you, but there's nothing you can do," she murmured from inside the stall. There was a silence. Then, to her surprise, she heard the sound of someone leaning against the sink. He wasn't leaving. "We've worked at the same company for 2 years, Richard said, his voice echoing softly in the empty restroom. "But I admit we don't really know each other. I'm Richard Sterling." She almost smiled through her tears, as if she didn't know who he was, as if the entire company didn't revolve around his imposing presence in the hallways. "Sarah Campbell," she replied softly. "Sarah," he repeated, and the way her name sounded in his voice did something strange to her chest. "Are you crying because of today's meeting?" The question caught her off guard. He had watched. Of course he had. Richard personally supervised important training sessions, and this one was about implementing new management systems. Sarah had worked for weeks on the project only to have Veronica dismiss it all in front of everyone. "How did you know?" she asked, her curiosity overriding her embarrassment. "I was there. I saw how your boss treated your ideas," he said, a note of disapproval in his voice. "Ideas that, by the way, were excellent." Sarah felt the tears welling up again, but for a different reason now. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her work? When was the last time someone, especially someone in a position of power, had validated her efforts? "She's right, though," Sarah mumbled. "Maybe I really am not cut out for this." "Nonsense," he said, the firmness in his voice surprising her. "You have talent. You just need a chance to show it." Sarah finally opened the stall door. Richard was leaning against the sink, his arms crossed. He was even more imposing up close. Tall, elegant, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through people. But at that moment, there was something different in them, something almost kind. She must have looked like a disaster. Red eyes, tear-stained face, messy hair. But he didn't look away, didn't grimace in disgust or discomfort. He just watched her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked, genuinely curious. Richard was silent for a moment, as if asking himself the same question. "Maybe because I recognize courage when I see it," he said finally. "And it takes a lot of courage to keep trying in an environment that constantly dismisses you." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. It was as if he had seen something in her that she couldn't see in herself. "I should get back," she said, but didn't move. "You should," he agreed, but he didn't move either. They just stood there, looking at each other, and Sarah had the strangest feeling that something had fundamentally changed. She didn't know what or why, but something was different. "Now, Sarah." He said her name again, and she realized she liked the way it sounded in his voice. "I'd like you to have lunch with me tomorrow. I have a few ideas about your project I'd like to discuss." She blinked, certain she had misheard. "You, what?" "Lunch," he repeated with a small smile she had never seen before. "Unless you have other plans." Sarah looked at him, trying to process what was happening. The CEO of the company, the man everyone considered cold and unapproachable, was asking her to lunch after finding her crying in the bathroom. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'd like that. His smile widened, and she realized she might not know him as well as she thought. Excellent. No one at the Garden Bistro. You know where that is? She nodded, still in a daze. Until tomorrow. Then, Sarah. And with that, he left, leaving her alone in the restroom with her heart pounding and a single question hammering in her head. What on earth just happened? Sarah spent the entire night tossing and turning in bed with Milo, her ginger cat, observing her antics with feline disapproval. Richard's invitation echoed in her mind like a broken record. Had she misunderstood? Maybe it was just a business lunch. But then, why did her heart insist on racing every time she thought of the way he'd said her name? The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping the routine would calm her down. But she had barely booted up her computer when Olivia Cole appeared with 2 coffees and a mischievous grin. Spill it, her friend said, placing one of the coffees on Sarah's desk. Spill what? Sarah feigned innocence, but she knew Olivia too well. It was useless. Don't play dumb. Everyone's talking about how you were chatting with the CEO after the meeting yesterday. Some people are even saying you were seen coming out of the restroom together. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. It wasn't like that at all. He was just... Sarah, Olivia leaned in, lowering her voice. Richard Sterling doesn't talk to anyone unless it's absolutely necessary. And you want me to believe he just happened to strike up a conversation with you in the bathroom? Before Sarah could answer, Veronica Vance appeared, her face fixed in its usual scowl. Campbell, I need to see you. Now. Sarah exchanged a nervous glance with Olivia and followed her boss into her office. Veronica shut the door with more force than necessary. I don't know what game you were playing yesterday, but let me make one thing crystal clear, Veronica said, planting herself in front of Sarah with her arms crossed. You are an administrative assistant, nothing more. And if you think you can use your feminine wiles to impress the CEO and go over my head, you are sorely mistaken. Sarah felt her face burn. I wasn't doing anything like that. I don't even know what you're talking about. Don't play innocent with me. I know you two talked yesterday, and I know a woman like you wouldn't have the nerve to approach a man like Richard Sterling without a hidden agenda. A woman like me? Sarah repeated, feeling something hot boil inside her. Simple, plain, desperate for attention, Veronica said, each word a slap in the face. But let me give you a little warning. Men like Richard Sterling aren't interested in women like you. They play with you for a while, and then they go back to women on their own level. Women like Isabella Reed. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Isabella Reed, the director of communications. Elegant, sophisticated, successful. Everything Sarah wasn't. I understand, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Good. Now get back to work and stop daydreaming. Sarah walked out of the office on shaky legs, returned to her desk, and tried to focus on her reports. But Veronica's words echoed in her mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe Sarah had completely misread Richard's kindness. Maybe it was better to cancel the lunch before she humiliated herself even further. When the clock hit 11:30, she reached for the phone to call his secretary, but a familiar voice stopped her. Ready for lunch? Sarah looked up to find Richard standing beside her desk. He was impeccable as always, but there was something different in his expression. Softer, more human. I was actually thinking maybe it wasn't a good idea, she stammered, aware that half the office was watching them. Richard frowned. Why not? Sarah glanced around. She could feel the curious stares, hear the whispers. Veronica had stepped out of her office and was watching the scene with a furious expression. People are talking, and I don't want to cause any trouble. Richard followed her gaze, his eyes landing on Veronica. His features hardened slightly, but when he looked back at Sarah, his expression was gentle again. Sarah, can I speak with you in private for a minute? She nodded, and they walked to an empty conference room. Richard closed the door and turned to her. What's really going on? He asked, and the genuine concern in his voice caught her off guard. Sarah hesitated. How could she explain that her boss had essentially shamed her over a lunch that hadn't even happened yet? Veronica thinks I'm trying to use you to get a promotion, she said finally, opting for the truth. Richard was silent for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he chuckled. It was a low, rich sound she had never heard before. And are you? He asked. The question stunned her. What? No. I don't even understand why you invited me. Because I want to get to know you better. he said with a simplicity that left her speechless. Because yesterday I saw an intelligent, talented woman being devalued and it bothered me. And because, frankly, it's been a long time since I've met someone so authentic. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm not anything special. I disagree, he said, taking a step toward her. And if you'll let me, I'd like to prove that to you. She looked into his eyes and saw something that made her tremble. There was sincerity there, and something else, something warm and intense that made her stomach flutter in a good way. Okay, she whispered. The smile he gave her was devastating. Great, but let's take the garage exit. I'd rather not give the gossips any more ammunition. 15 minutes later, Sarah was in the passenger seat of Richard's car, a sleek, black BMW that smelled of leather and a subtle men's cologne. She had never been in such a luxurious car, but she tried not to look too impressed. Nervous? He asked, noticing how she was fiddling with her purse strap. A little, she admitted. I don't usually have lunch with CEOs. I don't usually have lunch with administrative assistants, he replied, and she couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a bad thing. The Garden Bistro was exactly the kind of place Sarah imagined a man like Richard would frequent. Elegant, discreet, expensive, the kind of place she would never walk into on her own. But as they sat down, something magical happened. The tension began to melt away. Richard was different, away from the office, more relaxed, funnier. He told stories about his most difficult clients, and she found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks. Do you like what you do? He asked as they waited for their main course. Sarah hesitated. I like helping people, solving problems. I like organizing chaos, but sometimes I feel like I have more to offer than people realize. Richard leaned forward. Like what? Ideas, solutions. I see things others don't, patterns, connections. But when I speak up, it's like no one is listening. I'm listening, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip a beat. They spent the next 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. She discovered he was passionate about architecture, that he ran marathons, that he had built the company from the ground up. He discovered that she was a voracious reader, did volunteer work at her church, and dreamed of traveling the world. Can I ask you something? She said as they were having coffee. Of course. Why did you choose Austin to build your company? I mean, you could have been in Denver or Seattle. His eyes lit up. Do you want the corporate answer or the real one? The real one. Because here, people still have soul. They still care about each other. And because the city has a special energy, a connection to its roots that you don't find in the huge metropolises. Sarah smiled. That's a beautiful answer. It's an honest one, he corrected. When they returned to the office, Sarah felt like she had met a completely different person. Not the cold, distant CEO everyone feared, but an intelligent, funny, and surprisingly kind man. Thank you for lunch, she said as he dropped her off at the building's entrance. Thank you for coming, he replied. I'd like to do this again. Maybe dinner next time. Before she could answer, Isabella Reed appeared on the sidewalk, looking elegant and flawless as always. Richard, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What a coincidence, finding you here. Sarah suddenly felt small and frumpy next to the other woman. Isabella was everything she wasn't, tall, sophisticated, confident. Isabella, Richard replied, but Sarah noticed he didn't seem particularly happy to see her. We don't want to be late for the meeting with the Japanese investors, do we? Isabella asked, completely ignoring Sarah. Sarah watched Richard's expression shift, his professional mask sliding back into place. You're right. Sarah, we'll talk later. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone on the sidewalk, her heart aching and Veronica's words echoing in her mind. Men like Richard Sterling aren't interested in women like you. Maybe she had been right after all. The following week was silent torture. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about her lunch with Richard, but he seemed to have reverted to his distant professional self. He walked past her desk without a glance, attended meetings without addressing a single word to her. It was as if that moment of connection at the restaurant had never happened. You look terrible, Olivia observed on Thursday, finding Sarah listlessly picking at a salad in the company cafeteria. Thanks for the support, Sarah mumbled. Seriously, you look like a ghost. What happened? Was the lunch with the CEO a disaster? Sarah sighed. How could she explain that the lunch had been too perfect, that she had allowed herself to dream of something impossible? It wasn't a disaster. It was confusing. Confusing how? He was kind, funny, interesting. He made me feel special. Sarah toyed with a lettuce leaf on her fork. But then, Isabella Reed showed up. Olivia said, as if everything suddenly made sense. The ex-girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend? Everyone knows they had a thing. Some say they still do. She's his type, right? Successful, beautiful, same social class. Sarah's stomach sank. But that doesn't mean anything, Olivia said quickly. Maybe he's just being professional. Maybe he doesn't want to mix business with whatever this is. Sarah laughed bitterly. Olivia, let's be realistic. Men like Richard Sterling aren't romantically interested in women like me. I was a fool to think it could be different. You're not a fool. You're beautiful, smart, and an administrative assistant who lives in a 400 square foot apartment with a cat. Before Olivia could argue, Veronica appeared at their table. Campbell, I need you. Now. Sarah followed her boss to her office, bracing for another lecture. But Veronica had something else in mind. You'll be presenting the quarterly report to the board of directors next Tuesday, Veronica announced, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the desk. Sarah blinked. Me? But you always present these reports. Well, I've decided it's time for you to take on more responsibility. Veronica's smile was predatory. After all, weren't you just complaining that no one recognizes your potential? Sarah looked at the papers. They were full of complex data, detailed analyses, financial projections. Exactly the kind of work she loved. But the presentation is Tuesday at 2 p.m.? For the entire board? Veronica leaned back in her chair, including the CEO, of course. Sarah's heart pounded. It was an opportunity, but it was also a blatant trap. If she succeeded, she would prove her capabilities. If she failed, Veronica would have the perfect excuse to get rid of her. I'll be ready, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Excellent. Oh, and Sarah, don't expect any help. I want to see what you're really made of. Sarah spent the next few days buried in spreadsheets. She arrived early, left late, and took work home. Milo watched her with disapproval as she spread papers across her small dining table. But she was determined, not just to do a good job, but to prove to herself that she was capable of more than anyone thought. On Monday night, she called her mom. Honey, you sound tired, Mrs. Evans said through the phone screen. I'm okay. Mom, just a little nervous about a presentation tomorrow. You always get nervous, but you always do great. Remember that science fair project in high school? You won first place. Sarah smiled. Her mother had a selective memory, recalling only the successes and conveniently forgetting the failures. This is different, Mom. This is important. Everything is important when you put your heart into it. And you have a huge heart, Sarah. Don't ever forget that. After hanging up, Sarah felt a little better. She spent a few more hours reviewing the presentation, ensuring every slide was perfect, every number checked, every conclusion well supported. On Tuesday morning, she arrived at the office 2 hours early. She wanted to print the materials, test the equipment, and rehearse one last time. But when she got to the conference room, she found a nasty surprise. The presentation she had prepared was no longer on the server. This can't be right, she muttered, trying to access the file in different ways, but there was no doubt. The file was gone. Her heart pounding, she raced back to her computer. At least she had a local copy. But when she opened the folder, she discovered the files were corrupted. Years of IT experience made her immediately suspect sabotage. Technical difficulties? Veronica's voice behind her made her jump. My presentation is gone from the server, and my local files are corrupted, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. What a shame, Veronica said, though her expression showed no sympathy at all. Well, you still have 3 hours. I'm sure someone as talented as you can improvise something. Sarah watched her walk away and felt a cold rage settle over her. Veronica had sabotaged her. She was sure of it, but she couldn't prove it. And even if she could, who would believe her? She took a deep breath. 3 hours. She could do this. She had the data in her head. She knew every number by heart. She might not have the polished slides, but she could create something simple and rely on her knowledge of the content. 2 hours and 50 minutes later, Sarah stood in the conference room with a basic but solid presentation. Her heart was beating like a drum as the directors began to file in. Richard was the last to arrive. He gave her a brief look, and she thought she saw a flicker of concern in his eyes, but it could have been her imagination. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah began, her voice steadier than she expected. "Today, I'll be presenting our quarterly report, along with some analysis I believe is relevant for our strategic decisions." The first few minutes were tough. She could feel the skeptical glances, hear the low murmurs, but as she delved deeper into the data, something shifted. She began to feel confident, passionate about what she was saying. She wasn't just regurgitating numbers. She was telling a story, connecting dots, revealing patterns that others had missed. "As you can see from this chart," she said, pointing to a projection, "if we cross-reference our customer satisfaction data with our support response times, we can identify an opportunity to increase retention by 15% just by optimizing our internal processes." A hush fell over the room. Then one of the directors leaned forward. "Is this your analysis, Sarah?" "Yes, sir. Based on data from the last 18 months. Interesting. Very interesting." The presentation continued, and Sarah felt herself growing with every slide. She was talking about something she loved, showing insights she had discovered on her own, proposing creative solutions to real problems. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, followed by applause, not just polite, but genuinely enthusiastic. "Excellent work, Sarah," said the CFO. "This analysis is exactly what we needed to make some key decisions." Sarah looked at Richard. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Intense, proud, admiring. "Sarah," he said, his voice cutting through the room's buzz, "could you stay for a few minutes? I'd like to discuss a few of your proposals." The other directors filed out, leaving them alone. Sarah gathered her materials, her hands trembling slightly, still processing what had just happened. "That was impressive," Richard said once they were alone. "Thank you," she murmured, unable to meet his eyes. "Sarah, look at me." She lifted her gaze to find him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Do you have any idea how brilliant that was? The insights you revealed, the opportunities you identified. I just did my... No, you did much more than that." He moved closer, and she could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne. "And I have a proposition for you." Before she could ask what it was, the door opened and Isabella Reed walked in. "Richard, you didn't forget our meeting with..." She stopped short when she saw Sarah. "Sorry, I didn't realize you were busy." "It's no problem," Sarah said quickly, gathering her things. "I was just leaving." "No, wait," Richard said, but Sarah was already at the door. "We'll talk later," she said, and slipped out before he could stop her. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. She had done it. She had presented to the board, and it had been a success. But why then did she feel so empty? Maybe because, deep down, she knew nothing had really changed. She was still just Sarah Campbell, the administrative assistant, and Richard Sterling was still the unattainable CEO who belonged in a world with people like Isabella Reed. But for a few minutes in that room, she had been seen, recognized, and valued. And maybe, for now, that was enough. Sarah arrived at the office the next morning expecting everything to return to normal. Her, invisible at her desk, Richard, distant in his corporate world, but she had barely turned on her computer when his executive assistant appeared. "Sarah, Mr. Sterling would like to see you in his office, now." Her heart leaped into her throat. She grabbed a notepad, trying to look professional, and followed the assistant down the hallways to the executive floor. She had never been in Richard's office before. It was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, furnished with modern pieces, and an entire wall was covered with books on architecture and business. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. But instead of sitting behind the massive desk, he pulled a chair up to sit beside her. "About yesterday," he began, and Sarah braced for the worst. Maybe he'd had second thoughts. Maybe he thought she had been too presumptuous. "I'd like to offer you a position on the strategic analysis team." Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry, what? Strategic analysis? You'd report directly to me. A 60% salary increase, full benefits, and your own team." He leaned forward. "Sarah, what you did yesterday was extraordinary. You saw patterns that senior analysts have failed to identify. I have a company to run, and I need people like you by my side." Sarah felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Is this real?" "Completely real." He smiled, and it was like the sun had risen in his office. unless you prefer to continue being underestimated by Veronica Vance. You know about that? His expression hardened slightly. I know more than you think. I know your files were deleted yesterday. I know you had to remake the entire presentation in 3 hours. And I know who was responsible. Sarah felt her face flush. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove it. I just need to protect my talented employees. He leaned closer, and Sarah could see the golden flecks in his dark eyes. Do you accept? It was everything she had ever dreamed of. Professional recognition, intellectual challenges, the chance to prove her worth. But there was something in the intensity of his gaze that made her tremble. Why are you doing this? She asked softly. Because you deserve it. Is that all? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. No, he said. It's not just that. Sarah's heart beat faster. Richard, maybe you should accept the offer first. We can talk about the rest later. She took a deep breath. It was an incredible opportunity, but it was also a complicated one. Working directly with him, seeing him every day, trying to keep her composure when he looked at her like that. I accept, she said, before her courage could fail her. The smile he gave her was devastating. Excellent. You start Monday. I'll have them prepare your new office. My own office. With a view of the city's Central Park. I thought you liked that. Sarah stood up, still in a daze. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. He stood as well, standing very close. About that dinner I mentioned. Before she could reply, the door swung open and Isabella Reed walked in without knocking. Richard, we need to review the presentation for the German clients. Oh, she stopped, seeing Sarah. Again, Isabella. I wasn't aware we had a meeting, Richard said, a clear note of irritation in his voice that Sarah had never heard before. We don't. I thought you were free. Isabella glanced between them. But I see you're busy. Sarah just accepted a position on the strategic analysis team, Richard said. If he was expecting Isabella to be pleased for Sarah, he was disappointed. The woman's expression tightened. How interesting. Such a rapid promotion. Sarah felt her face burn. The insinuation was clear. Well, I'll let you two talk, she said quickly. Sarah, wait, Richard said, but she was already heading out. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. She had gotten her dream promotion, but she already knew it was going to be a nightmare. Everyone would think she had slept her way to the top. No one would believe she had earned it. Congratulations. Sarah turned to find Isabella behind her. The woman had left Richard's office and followed her. Thank you, Sarah mumbled. I have to admit I'm curious, Isabella said, leaning against the wall beside her. How exactly does an administrative assistant get Richard Sterling's attention to the point of earning a promotion in a matter of days? Hard work, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice firm. Isabella laughed, a cold crystalline sound. Of course. Hard work. She stepped closer. Let me give you some woman-to-woman advice. Richard is a fascinating man. Rich, powerful, charming when he wants to be. It's easy to get carried away. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? Isabella tilted her head. Well, then you won't mind knowing that he and I have a dinner meeting tomorrow night. Business, of course. But you know how these things can evolve. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. That's none of my business. No, it isn't, Isabella agreed. But I thought you should know, especially if you're thinking of mixing business with other things. With that, she walked away, leaving Sarah alone in the hallway with a broken heart. Isabella was right. She had gotten carried away, creating fantasies about a man who was clearly out of her league. She returned to her desk on shaky legs. Olivia was waiting with wide eyes. Is it true? You got promoted? How did you know? The whole office is buzzing. Veronica looks like she's about to explode. Olivia leaned in. Tell me everything. Sarah told her about the offer, trying to sound excited, but inside she felt hollow. The promotion had lost its shine after her conversation with Isabella. That's incredible, Olivia exclaimed. You deserve it. Everyone's going to think I slept with the boss, Sarah said quietly. Screw them. You know the truth. But did she? Sarah wasn't sure of anything anymore. The rest of the week passed in a blur. She began to organize her transition, trained her temporary replacement, packed up her things. Richard walked by her desk several times, always looking like he wanted to talk, but there was always someone around. On Friday evening, Sarah was packing the last of her items into a box when he appeared. The office was nearly empty. We haven't talked much this week, he said, leaning against her desk. You've been busy, she replied without looking at him. Sarah, look at me. She reluctantly raised her eyes. Did something happen? You seem distant. Sarah hesitated. How could she explain that she was realizing she was falling for him, but knew it was an impossible dream? I'm just nervous about the new position, she lied. Richard studied her for a long moment. Are you sure? Because if someone said something to upset you? No one said anything. She cut him off quickly. Everything is fine. But it wasn't. For the next few days, Sarah tried to convince herself she could work with Richard and keep her emotions in check, that she could see him every day and not remember the way he had looked at her in the bathroom, the way his voice sounded when he said her name. It was a lie, but she clung to it like a life raft. On Sunday night, as she was picking out clothes for her first week in the new role, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Sarah, it's Richard. Her heart jumped. How did you get my number? HR, sorry to call on a weekend, but we need to talk. About work? There was a pause. No, not about work. Sarah closed her eyes. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she wasn't ready. Richard, tomorrow after work. My office, please. Before she could protest, he hung up, leaving her alone with Milo and the certainty that her life was about to change again. And this time, she wasn't sure she was ready for the fallout. Sarah's first week in the new role was an emotional roller coaster. Her new office was everything Richard had promised, spacious with a view of the city park. She had her own assistant, access to data she had once only dreamed of seeing, and projects that made a real difference in the company's strategy. But there was one problem. Richard. He always seemed to be nearby. He'd stop by her office several times a day. He'd ask for her opinion on important decisions, include her in strategic meetings. It was exactly what she had always wanted professionally, but emotionally, it was torture. Every time he smiled at her, her heart did a flip. Every time he praised her, she remembered Isabella's words. And when he called her name in that deep, smooth voice, it took all her willpower to remain composed. On Thursday, during a meeting about international expansion, Sarah caught Isabella watching her with a calculating expression. After the meeting, as Sarah was organizing her notes, Isabella approached. Settling into the new role, okay? She asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yes, thank you. Good. Richard mentioned you two have been working very well together. Isabella paused. In fact, he told me about your dinner together last week. Very romantic, apparently. Sarah frowned. What dinner? Oh, Isabella feigned surprise. Perhaps I got confused. So many dinners, so many women. It's hard to keep track sometimes. Sarah's heart sank. Isabella was lying, but the seed of doubt had been planted. How many other women were there? How many other assistants or employees before her had received sudden promotions? That afternoon, Richard appeared in her doorway. Ready for our talk? He asked. Sarah glanced at the clock. 6 p.m., the office was nearly empty. Actually, I'm a little tired. Can we postpone? His expression hardened slightly. Sarah, we've been putting this off for a week. It's important. To you, maybe. To us. Sarah sighed and followed him to his office. He closed the door and turned to face her. What's going on? He asked bluntly. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been avoiding me. You give one-word answers when I talk to you. You look away when I smile. He stepped closer. What did I do wrong? Sarah felt tears threatening. How could she explain that he hadn't done anything wrong except make her believe there could be something between them? You didn't do anything wrong, she said quietly. Then why do I feel like you're running from me? Because maybe I am. The raw honesty in her voice caught him off guard. He stopped, his eyes searching hers. Why? Sarah took a deep breath. If she was going to end this, she would at least be honest. Because I'm falling for you, she said, the words a mere whisper. And I know it's ridiculous. I know we're from different worlds. I know you have your life. You're sophisticated women like Isabella Reed, but I can't help it, and it's tearing me apart. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for him to say something. Anything. Sarah, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Look at me. She reluctantly lifted her eyes and found an expression she couldn't decipher. Do you think I promoted you because I feel sorry for you or because I want something in return? I don't know. And do you think I've spent all week looking for excuses to see you because I'm just a considerate boss? Sarah didn't answer. And do you think I'm standing here after 6 p.m. trying to figure out why you're avoiding me because I care about all my employees this much? Because if you believe all that, you're deeply mistaken. He moved closer and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I promoted you because you're brilliant. Because your mind works in a way that fascinates me. Because when you talk about data and strategy, your eyes light up in a way that makes me want to listen to everything you have to say. Sarah's heart began to race. And I spend my week looking for excuses to see you because it's been the best part of my day. Because when you smile, really smile, it's like the whole world gets brighter. But Isabella said, "Forget Isabella," he said, his voice growing more intense. Isabella Reed represents everything I thought I wanted. Success, sophistication, convenience. But you, he gently touched her face. You remind me of who I really am when I'm not being the CEO. You make me laugh. You make me want to be a better man. Sarah felt tears stream down her face. I'm scared. Of what? That this is a dream. That you'll wake up one day and realize I'm just Sarah Campbell from the Rosewood district, who rides the bus and shares an apartment with a cat. Richard smiled, and it was the most tender smile she had ever seen. Sarah Campbell from the Rosewood district, he repeated softly. Who is a voracious reader, who volunteers at her church, who sees patterns that PhDs in economics can't, who cries when she's frustrated but never, ever gives up, who treats everyone with kindness no matter who they are. He leaned closer. Do you think I care where you live or how you get to work? Do you think what attracts me to you has anything to do with money or status? I don't know what attracts you to me, she whispered. Your authenticity, your strength, the way your face lights up when you talk about something you love. The way you look at me like I'm just Richard, not the CEO of the company. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. Sarah, may I kiss you? He asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice she had never heard before. In response, she leaned in, and when their lips met, it felt like the entire world finally made sense. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if they were both testing if this was real. Then it deepened, and Sarah felt like she was both soaring and sinking at the same time. When they broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. This complicates everything, she whispered against his lips. Yes, he agreed. It complicates a lot. So now what? Now, he said, we figure it out together. They stood there, holding each other as the city lights twinkled to life below. Sarah knew they would face challenges, office politics, gossip, judgment, but in that moment, in Richard's arms, she finally felt like she was home. Sarah, he said against her hair. Yes? About that dinner I mentioned 2 weeks ago? She laughed, the first genuine laugh in days. Yes, Saturday night. Something special. Just the two of us. Is that a date, Mr. Sterling? It's a date, Ms. Campbell. And for the first time since she'd met Richard Sterling, Sarah allowed herself to believe that fairy tales were possible, even for ordinary girls who lived in small apartments with cats, especially for them. Epilogue. Months later, Sarah adjusted the pearl necklace, a gift from Richard for their 1-month anniversary, and looked at her reflection. The navy blue dress was simple but elegant, perfect for the grand opening of Sterling Innovation's new headquarters. You look beautiful, Olivia said, appearing behind her. Who would have thought my admin assistant friend would end up as the CEO's girlfriend? Former admin assistant, Sarah corrected, smiling. I'm the director of strategic analysis now. A promotion that was completely deserved, Olivia said firmly, and anyone who says otherwise will have to deal with me. Sarah laughed. The first few months had been tough. The gossip, the stares, the snide remarks. Veronica Vance had been transferred to another branch after a departmental reorganization, but Sarah knew it was more than that. Richard didn't tolerate anyone disrespecting the people he cared about. Ready? He asked, appearing at the doorway of the ladies' room where they were getting ready. Sarah turned and smiled. Even after 6 months, he still made her heart race. He looked flawless in his tuxedo, but it was the way his eyes lit up when he saw her that made her feel truly beautiful. Ready, she replied. I'll leave you two alone, Olivia said with a wink. See you at the party. When they were alone, Richard stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. You know you're going to be the most beautiful woman at this party, don't you? He murmured against her ear. You're biased, she said, but she was beaming. I'm honest, he corrected. The party was in full swing when they arrived. The new headquarters was stunning, a modern building with architectural lines that Richard had personally overseen. Sarah watched him greet investors and clients, always charming and professional. But every so often, he would look across the crowded room at her and smile as if she were his anchor in the sea of social chaos. Sarah! Mrs. Evans appeared at her side, beaming in a new dress Sarah had bought for her. What a wonderful party. Are you having fun, Mom? So much fun. And Richard is even more charming in person. Your sister loved him too. Her mom leaned in. He asked for my blessing, you know. Sarah blinked. Asked for your blessing for what? Oh, sweetie, you can't be that naive, her mom said with a knowing smile. Before Sarah could fully process what that meant, Richard appeared beside them. Mrs. Evans, may I steal your daughter for a few minutes? Of course, dear. She's all yours. Richard led Sarah out to the building's terrace where they had some privacy and a breathtaking view of Austin's skyline. Were you and my mom talking about anything specific? She asked, trying to sound casual. Maybe, he said, but there was a nervousness in his expression she rarely saw. Sarah? He took a deep breath and turned to face her. Sarah, these have been the most incredible 6 months of my life. You've changed me in ways I didn't even know were possible. You made me remember that success without love is empty. You taught me that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. You took my controlled, organized world and turned it upside down in the best possible way. And now, I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you. He knelt, and Sarah felt tears begin to stream down her face. Sarah Campbell, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me? Will you keep showing me what really matters? The ring was perfect. A classic, elegant solitaire, exactly what she would have chosen herself. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He smiled, a little louder. Yes. As he slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Sarah thought about how much her life had changed in just 1 year. She had been just another invisible employee. Now she was a respected executive, in love with an incredible man who had truly seen her and valued her for exactly who she was. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you too, he replied. Forever. Through the glass doors, they could see the party continuing, but for a few precious minutes, it was just the two of them under the Texas stars, planning a future that promised to be as extraordinary as it was unexpected. Sarah Campbell had gone to cry in the company bathroom, never knowing the CEO would find her there. And that one encounter had changed not just her career, but her entire life. Sometimes the best fairy tales begin in the most unlikely of places.